Welcome to Chaos Divided, your weekly dose of wholesome hammer. If you're a fan of what we do, we hope you'll subscribe and follow us along. And if you'd like to support us directly, you can find us on patreon.com/Chaos Divided 40K. This week, it's an important topic. And with the new AOS edition, I think it's very important that we talk about welcoming and retaining new players to the hobby. This week's quote, I feel like, surmises how a lot of more competitive players approach the game. And it's the thing we need to talk about. So the quote is, "It is not enough that I achieve victory, my enemy must suffer total defeat. It is not enough that I kill, all my foes must die. It is not enough that I succeed, all others must fail." That's from Mogul Kamir from the 5th edition Imperial Guard Codex. And who better to talk about being a good sport than the Wall Mistress herself?
Well, I have notoriously been not a good sport at points in my Warhammer journey, so, I feel like I can probably approach this from many different angles.
Isn't your slogan literally like, be nice, roll dice? I feel like that's...
It used to be.
Yeah.
It used to be, yeah. Yeah, but I mean, I feel like my experience being in a very, very competitive local meta has sort of made me approach that and yes, still be nice, but my journey is a little bit different than when I first started now. So yeah, the new slogan is play fearlessly.
Oh, I mean, you know what? I feel like that's still fits, and I think that's I think it's important to play fearlessly. Yeah, so the impetus was some old world players being salty about the cancellation of Warhammer Fantasy, and my initial reaction after looking at who was saying some of those things was like, it was your fault. Like, you are the type of player that creates like that toxic environment that doesn't attract and retain people to the hobby. You're actively pushing people out. And then I was like, you know what? I think we need to talk about this. With new AOS coming out, Warhammer 40K is at like an all-time, popularity high overall. The old world's out there, Horus Heresy's out there. Like, there's only more people playing Warhammer than ever before. And like, if we don't, for lack of a better term, figure our Nurgle out, we're gonna we're gonna die. The whole the community will collapse.
Yeah, and there's less and less young people coming into this hobby all the time, and especially now because the barrier to entry in terms of just the price of models and books is so high that we really need to be doing everything in our power, I think, to try and retain the good people who are giving it a shot to begin with. So I agree. And I've heard much the same thing, actually, coming out of my Warhammer 40K group as well. For a while, there was a really core group of really super competitive players. And they were like, oh, I just can't find games. How are you guys finding games? And in my head, I'm like, it's because you just beat the snot out of new players and now they don't want to play you, if they even came back at all. That's why your pool of people to play is consistently getting smaller and smaller, not bigger and bigger.
Which is worse for all of us overall. And I even think back to like some of my, I played Warhammer back in the day, left the hobby for a decade, and then came back. And like the only way I knew how to get back into Warhammer was like I just signed up for a tournament, showed up, and got my face absolutely pounded in. And that shouldn't be what happens. Like, that shouldn't be the way you figure out how to play Warhammer, is just like smashing your face against people, just like beating the crap out of you until you figure the game out. And if you're in an area that has a great game store, that has a great community, that can like help ease that. But yeah, there's so many I see it all the time. There's a group or a Discord, and somebody's like, hey, can I, anyone want to play this week? And then no one responds. Not even a hey, I can't this week. Just no response. And how long are you going to fight that?
Yeah. In my sort of local groups, if I see somebody new come in, I really try to be like the first person to pounce on them, because it can get really, really tough if you play any of the competitive players, because they don't know how to pump the brakes. And I feel like I like to be a good ambassador to new players. I also really enjoy teaching. Like, I'm not tactically very good. Like, I don't win events or anything like that, but I do consider myself a very good teacher. So I like to be the one to maybe jump in and see where they're at, maybe like warn them a little bit about, how competitive it can be. And yeah, I kind of see that as my purpose, I guess, in the local scene. I also think it's good to have a lady in your local area, like that will be the one to sort of put themselves out there, because sometimes other women will see that, and like it or not, we've got like a very bad social stigma attached to wargaming in general,
Mm,
that makes a lot of women kind of not wanted put themselves out there. So that's kind of how I feel. I feel like a little bit of what's the word I'm looking for? I guess responsibility to my local sort of gaming group.
that's fair. And your point about women having a bit of a stigma, because a lot of some of the best and like most ruthless D&D players I've met are women who I know if you gave them like a 40k faction or an AOS faction, like they would do wonders with it. Like they're just like they've got all of the, tools in the toolbox. They have that way of like approaching a game, and then they're just like, "You no, thank you." Because Warhammer is it's a little more neckbeardy than I think a lot of us want to talk about.
I haven't really experienced that.
Really?
Yeah, like I actually just saw like a reel on Instagram that was sort of perpetuating this idea of game stores having like really creepy dudes in it, and I haven't experienced that. I talk about it a lot, and like I don't know if it's just because I'm older. I'm I guess, like, I'm just super average looking. I'm average in every single way. So I think maybe I slip underneath the radar, because I have definitely heard horror stories, but it's just not been my experience. Um, and I this could be a whole nother, honestly, podcast episode about women specifically, but I definitely have some theories about why wargaming doesn't appeal to most women and why that's okay. It doesn't need to. Um, but, in general, yeah, it's not been my experience that there's been, like, creeps at the game store.
I don't necessarily mean like creeps in that sense. Like when I say neckbeard, I even just kind of think of the actually nerds that are just like, if you're not 100% in, they're gonna kind of like. And I find some of them
Yeah.
tend to be harder on women. So it's not necessarily that they're like creeping and lecturing. It's more like
In my
just
experience, those
gatekeeping.
in my experience, those guys only exist on the internet. I've not ever once come across one in real life.
Damn,
Yeah.
damn.
And I travel to
Yeah.
go to events, right? Whenever I'm in a new town, I'm like, "Hey, I'm gonna check out a local game store. I wanna see the scene." Like, I want to experience this. I want to see what other women are talking about, because sometimes I get messages from women that are like, "Hey, how do I deal with this?" I'm like, "I honestly don't know. I've not been in that situation." And so, yeah, driving through a town, do a quick Google search. Do they have a game store? Stop in. Never once have I experienced this. And so yeah, I don't really know what else to say except like it must be regional. And if that's the case and you're listening to this and you know that regionally this is the case, then like maybe you need to take a step into the space and take ownership of it and be determined to change that in your local area.
Yeah, because I can even think of, there's been a few incidences with some folks, and even just like locally, and I think there has been a few people that have had to kind of go up and just be like, "Hey, you like smarten up," basically.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that talking about welcoming new players, I think that's just a universal thing, whether not just for welcoming women to the hobby, but just if you're at an event and you see somebody's there that you've never seen before, and like no one's letting them into any conversations, nobody's talking to them, nobody's like engaging with them. You know, whoever's played with them their last round just like packs up and is like gone and doesn't engage with them, doesn't talk about how the game went. Like, be that ambassador. I think that's such a huge step. I mean, realistically, like, I stuck around in Warhammer partly because Kaylee did that for me. Kaylee was like my ambassador. It was at one of the like second or third event I went to, and we just sat and had lunch together, and just like having somebody to talk to and not feel like I was just like alone and beating my face against this is part of what was like, okay, you know what? Maybe I can like figure this out, and it's worth like spending time on.
Yeah. I will say that I don't think that I would go back to another event after my first tournament if it wasn't for Space Marine Steve from Play on Tabletop, because he was at my very first tournament. He traveled to go to like one of my local tournaments, and I was all alone. I didn't have anybody to go to lunch with. Nobody was talking to me. I was so scared. I was a ball of nerves because I have social anxiety. And all it took for him to make me want to maybe come back was him just even during one of my games, he could see it wasn't my turn. He stopped in and just talked to me about my army, and that's it. He didn't even have to spend lunch with me. That was all it took for me to be like, oh, maybe there are some good people here. Like, maybe I could weasel my way in and find friends.
Yeah.
It really doesn't take a lot to just be that ambassador for somebody.
And I think that's important because it doesn't have to be this like giant role you take on. Like, it is as simple as like the positive Discord message, or the like, you know, walking up to a table and just saying hi, or just being the person who says hello to everyone. And like, I don't know, I've definitely tried to, since getting more comfortable myself, do more of that. And I don't know, we're all big Warhammer nerds. Everyone in that room wants to talk about Warhammer. Like, you know what everyone's there for. Like, all you have to just be like, it's like, hey, that's really, like, I love what you did with this. That paint job is amazing. And somebody's going to be like, oh yeah, and just like stream of consciousness their love of this thing that you also love.
Yeah, it's so magical to go into an event or a game store and like know you have something in common with everybody in that building. You know? As somebody with social anxiety, that takes a lot of the burden of socializing off of me to just be like, oh, I'll just talk about the new release this week. I'm sure everybody will know that, you know, the new General's Handbook or whatever came out, right? You've automatically got an icebreaker. It's probably one of the easiest conversations that you'll ever have in your life.
Right? Like, you have such a basis of like, you know, whether or not like you're a lore buff or you're like a hobbyist, like, it doesn't matter what part of Warhammer. As soon as like, I feel like there's like a look, it's like the like, you're into Warhammer, and like when you're in an event, you know everyone's into Warhammer. So like, it's just so easy to just be like, hey, you want to talk about Warhammer? And people will be like, yes, I've been like dying to, like.
Yeah. And if you are a person who's kind of established in a group and you see that there's maybe somebody on the outskirts of the room who doesn't seem to have anybody, like, you could just move your group closer to them until they're just included and they don't have to feel like they have to come in, you know? That's one of the tricks that I like to do. And then, like, if you do it slow enough, then they can choose to move away if they don't, you know, want to be included. But I've not had that happen. So yeah.
It's even if you've ever like learned anything about like body language and like, because, you know, being a weird, you know, probably autistic, socially anxious person, you study these things, right? That's a normal thing. Even just knowing like how, you know, opening your feet up and like making sure your body like tilts so that somebody is included in the group. Like, just because somebody's standing there doesn't mean they're part of the group. Like, it's an active thing you have to do, and just being somewhat cognizant of your body language, just be like, to be more open rather than like closing. Like, it's as simple as just like, where is your shoulder pointing? If your shoulder points behind their shoulder, then they're in. If it's pointing in front, you've cut somebody out. And that simple like switch is the difference between somebody feeling like they're part of And even if they don't say anything, just standing there and just being like listening to other people talk about their games. Like if you're a new player and you don't know what your army even really does or how to talk about it, you learn by listening. And being part of that conversation and just feeling included is going to go a long way to learning how to be part.
I agree. And another little thing, if you're in like a Discord or a group chat or something, and somebody's asked for a game and nobody has said anything, and you know that you're busy this week and you just can't make it happen, even if they say no, maybe offer for the next week. Be like, hey,
Yeah.
I can't make it this week. What are you doing next week? You know, and so it makes them feel seen, which is a huge thing. If you're just ignored, you're like, do I even exist? Has anybody even seen that I've asked, right? So, you know, you acknowledge that they exist as a person, and you acknowledge that they're looking for a game. And even if they say, no, I can't make it next week or whatever, like you've still done your due diligence to make them feel welcome within the group.
One of the, when I was first, you know, getting back in, there was a couple like local like Facebook Messenger groups, like group chats, and the feeling of being like, hey, anyone want a game like this week? And then just seeing the 30 like names underneath show up as red and not having a single response. It honestly, it feels like, you know, talking about that like shoulder shunning, it's like everyone's just like, no thank you. Like, I don't even want to acknowledge that you exist.
Yeah. It absolutely is. It is like the digital shoulder snub.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you might not even be consciously doing it, but it's, you know, you look at it and you're like, oh, I don't have time this week. But just being the person that goes like, hey, I'm sorry, I'm busy this week. Maybe like even if you don't know what your next week look like, just say no. Like it's better to say no than leave that hanging. Because at least saying like no, maybe another time is at least saying like, hey, you're a valid person who's speaking right now, and like I appreciate that you threw this out there.
Yes. Yeah. I agree 100%. It is one of my biggest social struggles, actually, is to just be ignored. To me, that feels way worse than just being told no. And I don't know if it's like my version of neurospicy or whatever, but being ignored hurts the most. It is the worst for me. And yeah, so I would like to have my presence acknowledged. That makes me feel at least like I have a chance at being accepted.
I actually feel like I would rather have somebody be like, pound sand, you're the worst person I've ever met and I never want to play a game with you, than just be completely ignored.
Yeah.
Like at least that like recognizes my humanity.
Right. I exist on this planet. You actually saw what I said. I'm not just a ghost floating around thinking that I'm engaging with people on this planet. No, I exist. Yes.
Yeah. So no, like I said, these are not like big, heavy-handed like things you have to like martyr yourself with. Like it's the very small things that tend to make the biggest difference. And you know what I've said many times before is like, you know, the new player at an event, the new player at your store can like become your favorite person 6 months from now. But if they never come back, you're never gonna know that.
Yep. I 100% agree. And I actually think that it's really, as I've experienced more and more of the hobby, I understand more and more that like, for some people, it's really easy to sort of retain people. You know, it's really easy for them to be able to identify what that new player needs in order to thrive as a hobbyist. And for some people, they're just not able to do it at all. And I'm really looking forward to talking about the things that we can do to help people figure out what that other player needs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I think the point I was going to start off with was, you know, how to play against somebody for their first few games, and I don't mean like go easy on them, let them win, but there's a different approach you take at the table when somebody is new and being generous with their play in a way that you might not always practice, if you're used to playing with people that are more experienced, because it's a different set of mistakes and problems that are coming up. There's a higher degree of innocence, and thus I think there should be a higher degree of generosity for mistakes.
I like that. I like that a lot. I'm actually teaching somebody right now how to play, and this is somebody who has had really bad experiences learning from one of their other friends across multiple different systems, and she's just never had the opportunity to learn. In my opinion, she's never had the opportunity to learn the game, and so she's never stuck with it beyond 2 or 3 games because she only has this one friend to play, and this one friend is not invested in her learning experience.
Yeah.
And so her and I are going through the game, and I think, in my opinion, that it all starts in list building.
Yes.
For the teacher. That is the first step in teaching somebody how to play.
Mm-hmm.
If I just spam one type of unit in my list because it's good and it's going to go out and crush this person, they're not going to learn all of the different parts of their turn. Because normally when you're starting a teaching game, you as the teacher do everything first.
Mm-hmm.
You should be doing everything first to sort of establish the baseline understanding so that they can then go through and learn their rules and on their parts of the turn. And so for you, this is going to start in list building by making sure that your list has a number of different types of tools so that the other player can learn how to engage with those different types of tools, what those different types of tools generally do, and how to deal with them. It's also going to allow them to engage with every single part of the turn. So you're probably going to want to have something that shoots, something that fights, something that does magic, something, there's going to be different things that you need to build into your list to make sure that they can visualize the different parts of the game.
Well, and actually have practice interacting with them.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I think that's huge. And some of the better folks that I know of for working with new players, the conversations we've had, I completely agree. It starts at list building, and the way you build a list is very different than you would build a competitive list or even just a regular list for someone who's more experienced. Because you want to give them things that are easy to engage with and allow them to learn, even just some more of the more like ephemeral skills like target priorities and things like that take practice to identify threats and targets on the board. And if everything's the same, or if everything is terrifying, then how do you ever learn to identify the terrifying thing and how to actually engage with that? And the goal with a teaching game is not for you to learn a bunch, it's for them to learn a bunch.
But I do feel like if you're and I'll say this as somebody who learned how to play from an Art of War coach, somebody who is the best at their faction, pretty much, right? And quite often when we play, even to this day, he will bring units that are not good because that allows him to learn at the same time as I'm learning. If you are a player that can only bring your tournament list every single time that you play, no matter who you play against, I'm going to be offensive and say you're actually not that good of a player.
I don't think that's offensive. I think that's very accurate and true. Just completely. When I said that it's the goal the goal is for the other person to learn, that doesn't mean you're not getting anything out of it. Because 100%, I have learned things in some of the, first games that other people have played, just because you also generally have a little more time to think through what's going on. Like your style of play is different and your objectives are different. So you also have more time to be like, what happens when I do this? And then you get to kind of expand your own, strategy and your own tactics you bring to the game. But no, I think back to I played someone's I think it was their second 2,000 point game, and we spent 5 hours. Like, it was a long game, but it was letting her, go back to her book and understand and pull things back and talk through what she was doing. And when she went to do something that maybe didn't make a ton of sense, be like, hey, not saying, hey, that's wrong. It was more so like, hey, why do you want to do that? And having them explain through like what their thought process is. And then if you're like, well, if you want my opinion, and they do, and being like, well, this is how I would approach this. And then you can actually have a conversation about it. And, over time, those 5 hour games get shorter as people get more comfortable. But the lessons you learn by teaching somebody also how to talk through Warhammer, those last forever.
Yeah, and the wonderful thing about teaching people who have no frame of reference in wargaming at all is that they tend to think outside of the box, and sometimes they come up with new and exciting ways to approach the game that if you've been in it for a while, you lose some of that neuroplasticity in a way, and you start to see things within the frame of like wargaming in general. So sometimes teaching people leads to some really big sort of revelations about the game itself and what is possible within the rule set that you just maybe never considered before.
I think back to one of my earlier games against one of the very good players in this area. I played so unhinged that the game actually ended up, I think it was the closest I've ever played against him. Because my play was so unexpected to him, he didn't know how to keep up with me. Because it was just like, I did everything he didn't think I was going to do, and thus all of his play, his 5 moves ahead made no sense based on what I was doing. And it was a memorable game. And so there was a certain amount of like having that tested against you makes both of you a better player.
Yeah, so another thing that I think we could all be doing is having better pregame talks with everybody. I think sometimes, a new player will, and this I think is a problem for both the new player and the seasoned player for not having very good pre-game talks. How do you know that person is a new player? If you didn't ask, then you don't know. But that doesn't mean that you're excused, in my opinion, right?
Absolutely.
So and even to this day, I am a somewhat experienced player, but I play against people who are way more experienced than me, and the good ones will still always ask, like, what kind of list would you like me to bring? Like, are we just having fun? Are you practicing for an upcoming tournament? Like what kind of list are you bringing? And I think sometimes people feel a little bit like socially pressured to say, oh, just bring what you want. But you are well within your rights to say, and to even lead with, hey, I'm just learning. I would just like to have fun. If there's certain things you're working on, be like, I'm really working on learning how to use my movement better or whatever. I think it's absolutely okay to lead with those things. And as an experienced player hearing that, I think we need to be more accommodating to those players and look at it as an opportunity for yourself to try new things as well. Because without having those conversations, new players are getting curb stomped. Veteran players are not learning anything and not building relationships within our community. And, there's a really good chance that, people are going to get salty and not have fun and maybe even not come back.
Yeah, I think back to my very first game playing Emperor's Children. I bought that whole army list, dumped a bunch of money, put it all together over the course of like 3 weeks. So I was stoked to play this. Went to like a pickup night of Warhammer, and then just got absolutely reduced to rubble. And I was like, literally, I walked in and I was like, hey, it was all gray. I was like, this is my first time running this. I have no idea how this army works. I have no idea what I'm doing. And somebody was just like, it was like the height of 9th edition Iron Hands like
Oh
supremacy.
boy.
So it was like I am this fast like melee army, and I didn't actually connect to
Oh.
my opponent, and I was like, I am so sad. Um, and
Yeah.
you know, part of that is like I went in with like honest expectations, like honest. I was honest about like where I was at, and then the other person reciprocating that was just like, no, I smashed though. So like I don't think either of us got anything out of that game other than just like
Yeah.
I learned that you die a lot, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing too, so I'm teaching this friend how to play, and I specifically made both of our lists. So I gave her a unit that is super tough, heals a lot, and is really fast, and is a pretty decent caster.
Mm.
And I think if you are making a list for somebody, I guess that's another thing that we could talk about in a little bit. But if you're making a list for somebody, make the list better than yours.
Absolutely.
Like my list is about 200 points down, so I'm playing 800 points against 1,000 points. I gave her like an unkillable unit that she can just do whatever she wants with. It's not going to die, right?
Yeah.
And so that it gives her the opportunity to do the combat phase, move it really fast, learn how to do a run and all of that. And, you know, my stuff is getting killed, and that's the point, right? Also, new players really like to remove your models more so than winning the mission. They want to kill stuff, right?
I don't think
right?
that's a
So
new
let them
player
kill
bias,
stuff.
but
I'm just talking about, like, if you're playing a very competitive player, they generally like the problem-solving aspect of the mission a lot more. I mean, they still like killing stuff, but like in general, newer players not going to consider the mission at all.
No.
You could not even have a mission, and they are still learning, right? Maybe that's what you do for the first 3 games. Okay, we're just going to do kill points. See how much stuff you can kill. That is an acceptable mission for a new player.
I was gonna bring up kill points because I think that is actually one of the better ways to learn, like, you know, your first couple games. You know, as somebody evolves, adding complexity in can be helpful. But I've often seen, you know, rather than going to kill points, I've seen people be like, oh, well, we're not going to use stratagems, or we're not going to use like other elements of the game, and I'm like, simplify the mission, but keep all the tools in the toolbox so that you can then learn those aspects of it. Like, unless you want to, you know, bring it down into you know, a simpler game, but in that case I would say reduce the points rather than, you know, reducing sections of the game, because it really is like, I think everybody likes pulling models off the table. Sorry, nobody likes pulling their own models off the table. Everybody likes their opponent pulling models off the table. It's just like, I think it like beats at our like caveman hearts to just like subject violence, even if it's hypothetical and like imaginary. We're all just sitting there just like ooga chaka smash.
Yeah. And I mean, I still even have more experienced friends who play super casually. And like, really, the reason they're at the table is because they painted these minis and they enjoy your company and they just want to roll dice. And you know what? It's absolutely still acceptable to just play kill points with those players.
Yeah.
They'll have fun. You'll have fun. You'll spend less time calculating points and managing scores and stuff, which gives you more time to drink beverages and laugh and talk and get up to shenanigans. And, you know, if you're a competitive player and you just like, that seems like just too much of a hurdle for you, I'm sorry, because some of my favorite games have just been kill points.
Yeah. No, there's an elegance to just seeing who can kill more of who.
Yeah.
It sounds less elegant, but yet is more elegant somehow. It's like, it's who has the biggest stick.
That's right. And getting back to stratagems and all of the different abilities and stuff, if you know that you are teaching somebody, maybe familiarize yourself with maybe not all the exact specifics of the things that their faction or their models can do, but read through them so that you know, okay, like, I know that they heal. I don't remember exactly where it is, but, you know, or, oh, I know that they have a stratagem that lets them deep strike 3 inches or whatever. I don't know when that triggers or when I can use that, but I know it's in there, right? And then when they're learning, remind them that they have these things, right? Because they're trying to remember all the parts of the phase. They're trying to learn wargaming basics, which has no manual, by the
Hmm.
way. How you move your models in terms of maneuvering and tactics, that has no manual. There's really nobody who helps you with that. You have to learn all that on your own. So they have these two giant things that they have to remember. Maybe like take your winning out of the equation and just like remind them like, "Oh, hey, you've got you could pay one command point for an invulnerable save or
Yeah.
whatever it is." Like help them get practice with all of the pieces as much as you can.
Yeah, and I really think if you're somebody who's played even 100 games of Warhammer, which I know, like, if you're even a semi-experienced Warhammer player, like, it doesn't take long to get up to that 50, 100 games. You probably know every faction in the game better than someone who is brand new playing their army.
Yeah.
Like, you are
Yeah.
more familiar with how their army functions, how their army is supposed to work, like the theming of it, the technicalities of it. You might not know the name of the stratagems, but Thousand Suns have like the big Doombolt thing, and that Grey Knights go up and down. Space Marines have they have Armor of Contempt. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that there is a basic of how that faction functions in a way that your opponent likely does not.
Mhm, mhm. And then as you play more games with this person, instead of telling them like, "Oh, you can do this," you can start asking questions like, "Oh, do you have a thing that can help you in this
Yeah.
situation?" Right? And so then instead of it being on your shoulders, now it's becoming something they have to flip through their book to find it, and they're creating that muscle memory of being able to find the resources that they need.
Yeah, and I think that's where playing, not rushing to 2,000 points, I think can help,
Yeah.
because you're limiting the data sheets. You're, I mean, for 40k now, there's each detachment has 10 things that make it special. There's 6 stratagems and 4 enhancements that, depending on how they built their list, those 4 enhancements may not even all necessarily be there, and 6 stratagems. Like, it's even worth it to just say like, hey, do you mind if I read your like detachment rules just so I can like help you out with them, just so they're a little fresher in your mind too. So like, okay, you have like the 3-inch deep strike, or you have your version of Armor of Contempt, or you have a like shoot back thing, just so that you can go, you know what? All right, I can visualize where some of these things might come into play, so that you can ask those questions, and you can at least in the back of your mind go like, you know what? I can help guide them through using some of these things that aren't immediately on the table.
Yeah, and I'm kind of an overachiever when it comes to helping new players. And I make a cheat sheet for the store that I play at. So if there's somebody who is brand new, so I'm currently making one for Age of Sigmar. Thank you so much, Games Workshop, for sending me the rules in advance. I'm making one for Age of Sigmar so that on release date, bam, if anybody wants to play, they can have this sheet that goes step by step through each phase, telling them what happens next. And I love to just give that to a new player and be like, here, hold this while we play. I'm going to ask you, what is the next step? And then I'm going to show you what that looks like.
If you're comfortable sharing that, we can throw it up on the, put on the Patreon, like not be behind the paywall, just so anyone can find that.
Sure. As soon as release date is.
Yeah,
we'll put that up.
We're not breaking any NDAs here.
That's right.
No, that'd be awesome, because I'm sitting here like, I kind of want to play some AOS. I'm feeling the itch.
Yeah, you do. It's so good. It's so good. Yeah.
I mean, I got this giant dragon thing now that I know just like absolutely stomps. So like, I wanna move a big base around. I want to just stomp.
Yeah. I had my first like I don't want to call it a competitive game, but I had my first game with the new system with somebody who is very competitive, and it's definitely a tactical game, and the changes to terrain, and I could go on. But anyway, it's very good. It's very, very good. It's very tactical. I think that you really enjoy it. And yeah, I think every book has something that you're like, ooh, you brought that? Oh boy, like I've got a problem to deal with. But I also feel that like each book has a way to deal with it.
Those of you listening can't see how much Tanya just like glowed up and the like smirk on her face right now talking about Age of Sigmar. Yeah. So I think maybe once it's released, we'll do an episode and you can just gush about the new Age of Sigmar, because I feel like
the new.
You know what? I feel like I keep hearing about it, and I'm hearing it from people that like I'm like not expecting to hear about it from. Like I think Age of Sigmar is kind of like tingling some brains in a way that I don't know if it ever has.
Yeah, and I haven't even had the chance to do the whole spearhead thing, which is interesting because like I know content creators who are playing it, and they were people who in the last edition were like, I'm never gonna play Age of Sigmar. It's not old world. It's so bad, blah, blah, blah. And now that they've like had to play Spearhead because, they're content creators, it's their bread and butter. They're like, I don't want to play 40K anymore.
That's the Combat Patrol equivalent, isn't it?
Yes, but it's actually fun, apparently.
Actually fun. Combat Patrol sounds like a solid.
I know. I tried Combat Patrol. It's not for me.
I looked at it. I don't know if anyone around here would even want to play it. Like, I technically have 2 Combat Patrols. And I feel like anyone who would want to play Combat Patrol plays Kill Team instead.
Yeah. So the only advice that I would give to somebody who wants to start Combat Patrol or Spearhead is wait until the rules come out and you can read through how each one sort of works. I think that was my problem with Combat Patrol, is like, oh, I'm just going to try it with what I have, and the rules for those Combat Patrols didn't vibe with my playstyle at all.
Yeah.
So and I mean they're quite small battle forces, so I mean you could paint them up relatively quickly, but just really think about what your play style is, how you like to play, and then go in with a fresh slate and read the rules to pick one that actually like vibes with you.
I think that's very fair, because I think yeah, I don't know of anyone that I like have ever, any of the Combat Patrols I've looked at and been like, oh, that's how I want to play this game. Like, yeah, it's a lot of, you have to jive with how the creator of that Combat Patrol envisioned that, because it doesn't fall into the same, like, you're not playing the faction, you're playing that box.
Exactly. Yeah, so that's probably going to be something I do next week, is just kind of go through all the Spearhead rules and be like, what does vibe with me? So that's what I'm going to do.
Like, you can have a Spearhead or a Combat Patrol for a faction you don't play otherwise, just because it like, I know there's no such thing as cheap Games Workshop, but they are relatively less expensive than trying to build even a 1,000-point army.
Yeah, and I have a feeling that there's going to be more Spearhead events popping up as well, because, I mean, you can get 3 games in less time. So, yeah, I have a really strong suspicion that it's going to be easier to get Spearhead games in than it is to get Combat Patrol games in.
You think there's going to be, like, Spearhead events?
I do, yeah.
It's that good, damn.
Yeah. Yeah, because I feel like maybe people who are really invested in Warhammer 40K are not going to want to get invested in big AOS, but I think some of them might be like, oh, but this one box of Age of Sigmar, and then I can go play like an RTT and not be absolutely just destroyed the next day. Like, I think it's going to maybe appeal to people who don't necessarily want to invest that much in Age of Sigmar.
That's cool. I mean, it's also cool that it's that appealing. because
Yeah, I haven't played it yet, but at 40K players loving it.
I
So it
watched one
must
of the
be tactical.
videos. I watched Skari get absolutely hosed with Hedonites of Slaanesh. So that somewhat broke my heart, because I think if I was going to play it, I would want to play Hedonites of Slaanesh just to, warm my hedonistic heart. But
Well, you're gonna have to just read the rules and see if they vibe.
I don't think I'm a better player than Skari, but
But if it's one of his first times playing,
true,
right?
True.
Yeah. The first 50 games don't count, right?
First 50 games.
It's a metric.
I don't think the first 150 games count, because I'm still learning.
I am still learning as well. I feel like if you're not still learning, then you're probably losing.
True. You know what? Actually, I wanted to go back to one of the comments you made about the pregame chat. Because I wanted to talk about even like the pregame chat at an event, like not necessarily setting up the game, but just when you walk in. I had the last event I went to, the worst pregame chat. I don't even know if I've actually talked about this I think I might have complained about it before, but Buddy shows up and he said, "Hey, I'll let you in for all the swearing." But he walked up and he said, "Hey, my list is bull. It plays like bull, and it's gonna feel like bull the entire time we're playing." And that was his pregame chat. And I was like, I was so immediately off-put, and I was like, there are new players here. If they got paired with you and you just walk up to the table and that's how you deliver the news of like their impending destruction, that's not fun. Like, it immediately set such a bad tone for me, and I was like, thinking back to like, why do players not want to stick with the hobby? Can you imagine, like, that's your even first 10th game, somebody just walks up and is just like, "Hey, I suck to play against, deal with it."
Yeah, and like part of me wonders if this is like a psychological tactic to get inside people's heads. Right?
Right?
I feel like there's something weird going on there for sure.
And then the worst part is I beat him by 60 points. So like
You mean the best part of it?
So it was like, and his list was ridiculous. It was such a jaded list to play against that there was no satisfaction in beating it. I was just like, this wasn't fun for anyone, and you are now salty because I beat you.
Yeah.
Which is then like why are you here? Like, if you're not here to have fun, like, I get it. You know what? When you're at a competitive event, there's money on the line, blah, 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 whatever. But like, fundamentally, most people don't win anything. So like, fun is kind of your only payment. So like, why would you go in with such a like black-hearted approach?
And it's the approach, right? Because like, if you lead with that kind of pregame talk, like you have like crafted this crappy experience for yourself and others, right? Sometimes you just make a powerful list and you don't realize how unfun it is. I think that is actually the case for my local Thousand Suns player, is like, he doesn't realize, and I love him. He's part of my team. I love him to pieces. He is the nicest guy. He wants you to have fun, but I think he has built these lists and he doesn't understand how unfun they are for casual players to go against. That's a different beast altogether than the other. Like, I've purposefully built this so that nobody has fun.
You know what's something I think everyone should have some experience with is starting a new faction every once in a while, and not in a like, I'm not talking like chasing the meta, but like, trade army. Like, I'm thinking about this Thousand Suns player. Have them switch armies and have someone else play Thousand Suns against them and have them play something else, and I feel like they'll feel it and see it more. Because I think you need to see how other factions play to then understand what they're dealing with. Like, if you only play one faction, or you have your 2 or 3 factions that you've played to death and you know how they all work, but if you're in that position, go and make yourself a new player for a day. You know,
Yeah.
strip away all of your experience, all of your understanding, and see what it feels like, as close as you can get to someone who's never played Warhammer before, and just like walk in with very little preparation and go play. You know, if you're at a store that has armies on the shelf, ask to put a list together and just play a new faction.
Yeah, go play a different game even. Oh,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
you own people at 40K, go play Age of Sigmar a couple times with
yeah,
somebody who's at the same level as you are in 40K, and just experience what it's like.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I think that will help you understand what you're doing to other people if you don't necessarily, because it's hard to you sit there and you're like, well, I'm not as good as the best players. I can't possibly be that bad, you know, rough to play against. Not bad to play against, but rough to play against. And then
Mhm.
go see what it's like to kind of, you know, if you have a hard time empathizing with that naturally, go experience it.
Yeah. And honestly, like, so this player and I have had lots of conversations, and like, I really, really applaud him for trying to understand, right? So,
Yeah.
like, him and I have been talking about, like, well, like, how do, like, if I get to the table and I'm absolutely murdering somebody, like, what can I do to sort of make it better or whatever, right? And so I was always like, forget stuff in Deep Strike. Forget some of your rules.
Mm,
You know, like it's really easy to just like give them an extra few points or give them a unit to kill. That's going to ease this process for them rather than I just make it so you can't do anything, right?
yeah.
Like, you're not letting them win because you're still gonna win, but you're making them feel like they have some agency. Um, and I think for a lot of new players, feeling like they don't have agency to use their faction the way it's meant to be played, uh, is one of the things that will make them quit.
Yeah. I think if you're playing against somebody who's newer, those Primarch level units, like whether they're Demon Primarchs or Space Marine Primarchs, or I would put like the Avatar of Cain or the Incarn, like those just like absolute monster units, like just take those off the table, like immediately,
Yeah.
and you already shift the game to something that is more playable, because they're just, those models are designed to be very difficult to play against.
Yeah, I would say that some factions are designed to be hard to play against
Yes.
for new players. If you know that you are going to play a brand new player, maybe don't bring like knights.
Mm,
Maybe don't bring Thousand Sons where you know your whole thing is messing with their plan. Uh, maybe, and it's not just like bring a less optimized list, but maybe choose a faction if you have the option of bringing, one of many. Choose the faction that is going to give them the most interactivity. If I'm playing somebody new, I know I'm playing somebody new, I will almost always bring orcs because you get to kill stuff.
yeah.
I'm gonna kill some stuff. Like, I'm gonna shoot bad, but I'm still gonna show you what shooting does, right? Like, and it's gonna be the most fun for that person out of all of my factions. And if I'm playing them in Age of Sigmar, I bring ogres because my armor saves are bad. Like, I'm fairly slow if I just bring infantry, but I'll usually bring one infantry piece and one monster so they can kind of build, but mostly infantry. So they'll get to kill stuff, and they're slow, so they're not necessarily going to be there in the first turn. And I'm not going to put my big monster in them the first turn anyway. I'm going to choose not to do that. And yeah, so like if you have access to multiple factions, definitely consider what faction is going to feel the most fun for them. Sometimes you need to take into account what faction they're playing
I
in
think
order
you
to do that.
100%. I would actually, if you're playing somebody new, I would like to know what their list is before you make your list. Your list should be complementary to their list. Like, it should be, you should be able to look through their list and say, okay, you have A, B, and C. Well, I'm going to bring D, E, and F because I know you can deal with all of those things. And, you know, if it's their first game, you're going to be able to deal with it easily. If it's their third game, maybe it's going to be a little bit harder. You're going to have to, you know, think a little bit more creatively to deal with it. And then you kind of start adding on the complexity. But
yeah. And the only reason why I would change my list between the first and second game is if, even though you tried really hard not to, you still ended up pulverizing them, then I would put even some less good units in.
Yeah.
Or something. But other than that, I would play the same list against them every single time until you start to see that they're learning things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because you're giving them problems. You're giving them problems to solve in your list. Until they start solving those problems, there's no point in giving them a new one.
Absolutely. Because I really think, you know, if you craft a complementary list, then you also don't have to worry as much about the like underplaying against them. Because if you're, you know, if you're sitting there, you know, even if they're the same points, you know, not every data sheet in every faction of any version of Warhammer is tuned perfectly. So if you have a very unoptimized list that's going to be an uphill slog against anything just because they're too expensive for how bad they are, then you don't necessarily have to worry as much about like, oh, should I like not do this thing? Because that's the other thing is like, once somebody's a couple games in, you never want them to sit there and think you're giving it to like you're playing easy against them, or you're like not giving them as much of a challenge. Like you should more so like handicap yourself rather than, you know, play worse.
Yeah. And so also going back to my teaching game, we're playing on Tabletop Simulator. So we played the first battle round and then we saved it. So we're going to go back to it. But especially in the first battle round of the first game, be willing to maybe fudge some numbers, right? So like you really want to be demonstrating the game as much as possible. So I built this big, tough monster that moves a bunch of inches, and then if they fail a 5-inch charge in the first turn, it's really going to put them out of position. And also like the whole point was so that they could learn the fight phase. I don't just tell them to re-roll it, or just be like, oh, this dice is now a 4, and tell them like normally you wouldn't do this, but I really just want you to experience what the combat phase is right away. Right. And most of the time people learning will understand like, okay, I don't get to do this, but you know, I think it's important just to get as much experience with every part of the game as possible as soon as possible.
I agree. No, and I think to kind of circle back to the original point, like I think, you know, we're talking about Age of Sigmar being new. I even think, you know, as more codexes come out for 40k, I think you're going to see some people kind of coming back to the game that maybe have been, you know, haven't played in 2 or 3 years because they got tired in 9th, and, you know, new codexes bring people back. So, you know, a new player is also not somebody who has never played Warhammer before. A new player can be somebody who is, you know, so rusted they might as well be new. And just, you know, being open and being an ambassador for the hobby makes it better for absolutely everyone.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes you will, I mean, quite often I've seen people want to get their first game of the edition in, and then you see them being tactical, and you're like, what's your experience with gaming? And they'll be like, oh, I played in 3rd edition, right? Or oh, I also play like Conquest or whatever. And you'd be like, oh, okay. A big one is Kill Team, right? And you'll be able to identify those people right away because they'll start asking you questions.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh, and actually, this happened to me at Gamescom Canada. I played a Conquest demo. Very lovely staff member at the Conquest booth. And so I'm sitting there, I'm listening, and then all of a sudden I start asking questions like, can I shoot through my own units? Can I shoot through your units? Can this unit attack behind this unit? Is there any way that I can make that charge? and I start asking these questions. She's like, "What do you play?" Right? And I'm like, "Oh, I play a lot of Warhammer." And she's like, "Oh, okay, so we're not gonna do like a real demo. We're gonna talk about the general ideas of how the game works, right?" And I think if you are doing a teaching game, that kind of information is going to come up right away, and then
Yeah.
you can obviously adjust your plans. Okay, so like maybe I do play a bit harder, right?
Yeah.
Or like maybe this will be more like an actual game instead of a demo, you know? And yeah, that's always fun when that happens too. I taught somebody how to play 40K, and I saw this happening. Like, what's going on? He's like, "Oh, I play Kill Team." Like, okay, here we go.
I mean, if somebody's played Kill Team or Warhammer in older editions, it's very easy if they start quoting like strengths too low on everything. Like, there's a few like obvious tells, I feel like, that are they'll be like, "Oh, that's like strength 7," and you're like, "No, it used to be." Like,
Yeah.
you know this game. How do you know this game?
Yeah.
Like if they know too much about like data sheets off the top of their head, you're like, you are aware.
Mm.
But yeah, no, there's a yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways people come to think. Like, even I've been learning the old world. Like, my experience as a new player in the old world is very different than somebody who's never played any Warhammer before. So like, I notice in a lot of my games, people don't really know what to do with me, because it's the like, I understand Warhammer, I'm just really bad at the old world. So it's like, my plays are sloppy, but I know what I'm doing with things, and I can build lists in ways that people aren't expecting. So it's this like, your list looks terrifying, and then I just like completely mispilot it.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
that like, there's different challenges with different people, and I think just like having an honest conversation with someone and is more important than just like yeah, like you said, the pre-game talk is just so important, and just being like, "Hey, where are you at? Like what kind of game are we trying to play here?"
Yeah, and just be really, really honest, right?
Yeah.
Like, sometimes when I'm asking for a game, I'll be like, looking for game casual, and somebody will be like, "Hey, I'm practicing for an upcoming tournament. Do you want to play?" And I'll just be really honest, be like, "No, I really just want casual." It
Yeah.
is absolutely okay for you to ask for what you need at the table. Sometimes that might mean that you just don't vibe with the person who is reaching out for a game, but it's better than getting to the table and feeling like, "I can't do anything against this player. This is not how I wanted to play the game. I just wanted to have some laughs and like kill some models. Like, that's all
Yeah.
I really wanted." I think it's much better to make sure that you're getting what you need to have a good time, and the other player also is getting what they need to have a good time, than to be like accommodating to every single person who reaches out for a game.
One thing I've like tried to really take to heart is something JT talked to us about, is both players are responsible for the board state, and I feel like that has almost an infinite capacity to include, every element of what that game is. Obviously, if you're at an event, it's more targeted. You know what the sense of the game is going to be, and that quote, that can more so mean like playing the game itself. But I think it expands further. Both parties have a responsibility to have a good game, and
Yeah.
that starts with a conversation. And yeah, there's really no other way to promote different styles of play. We've been talking a lot about like narrative games lately. We've been talking a lot about different ways to play, and like, you have to have a conversation with people. This is a social thing. I know a lot of us are maybe more like cagey, socially anxious nerds but ultimately, this is a game about talking. It is about talking to another person. Yes, there's dice. Yes, there's models, but the whole game is about talking.
Yeah, like, you're gonna be at that table for 3 hours or more.
Yeah.
Like, you better make sure that you're invested in yourself having a pretty good time, because I've been at tables. It's partly why I don't know if I want to do big tournaments anymore, right? It's just
Mm.
because sometimes I get to the table and I play in that competitive kind of space and I'm just not having a good time, right? So it's my responsibility to make sure that I have a good time. And if playing at big tournaments is not that, then it's my responsibility to make sure I don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Any last thoughts?
I also just want to say, like, it's really easy to be kind, and I think that there's a lot of potential growth in you as the teaching player to learn to play in different ways. Like, if you can learn to teach another player very well, and if you could learn to play narrative when you only have ever played competitive before, if you can learn to be flexible in all of those situations, I do think that you will become a better player in general.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's a pretty well-worn quote at this point, but you know, I can't even think of how to say it exactly. But just, you know, the road to mastery requires teaching. Like, you yourself can't become the best that you are until you can learn how to explain it to another person, and it changes
Yeah.
everything about how you approach. I mean, this is a very general point. It changes how you approach anything. But you will think differently about the game when you are forced to explain what you're thinking to another human being.
I agree with that. That's very valid.
I didn't say it very elegantly, but here we are. On that note, thank you for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe to Chaos Divided wherever you're listening from, and you can find us on Instagram and YouTube at Chaos Divided 40K. If you're a fan of what we're doing, you want to grow, join our growing Wholesome Hammer community. You can find us at patreon.com/Chaos Divided 40K. Support the show, join the Discord, chat with us, whatever you want to do. If you'd like to connect with us directly, we're at the .war mistress on Instagram, yes, and Tanya Gates on YouTube. At Snurgle_Snurgle and at Blushing Noise Marine. I will figure it out someday. I don't know why. I wrote it down this time. This is how bad this is. I was staring at it just going, the...
But you got it.
I got there. I'm so bad. I'm so bad at promotion.
Me too.
Every few weeks you're like, hey, just like tag me when you post about this episode. I'm like, I am gonna forget to do that. So until next time, bye-bye.
Bye everybody.